Night had closed over the Chiricahua Mountains like a blanket of iron and ice. It wasn't just a winter storm, it was an ancient fury descending from the snow-capped peaks with the roar of a ravenous beast. The wind lashed the slopes like invisible whips, whipping up frenzied eddies of snow that obliterated trails, erased footprints, erased all hope of direction. The trees creaked under the weight of the ice and the sky. The sky was a compact darkness devoid of moon or stars, as if night itself had decided to devour the earth. In the midst of that white immensity, barely visible through the blizzard, a lone rider advanced. His silhouette was a blurred shadow mounted on a sturdy-backed Allen horse. Each footstep echoed dully on the thick snow. The man wore his cowboy hat pulled down to his eyebrows, his face covered by a dusty bandana, now hardened by the ice. Frost clung to his mustache and eyelashes. With each breath, clouds of steam escaped his mouth as if his body, too, was fighting to avoid freezing. Subscribe and turn on notifications. If you're passionate about intense stories of the Old West, lone cowboys, strong women, forbidden passions, bullets whizzing through the night, and intertwined destinies under vast skies, this is the place for you. Like, share with your friends, and stay until the end because this story has fire, snow, and a moment you'll never forget. Now back to the storm. The cowboy's name was C. Matthews. He had crossed more deserts, rivers, and ghost towns than he could remember. Some said he had fought in the Civil War. Others swore they had seen him years before in Kansas, making a living hunting bandits. The truth, as is almost always the case in the West, was a mixture of both, and many more lies. Cole was a man who didn't look back, but that night in the midst of the storm, even he began to feel that the past and the present could be buried under the same layer of snow. His horse, Dusty, struggled forward. The icy wind cut across his flanks, and each breath the animal exhaled was a warm gust that vanished instantly into the blizzard. Cole pulled on the reins, lowering his head to shield himself from the blast. "Easy, lad," he murmured, his voice rasping. "Just a little longer." There was no light, no trails, no company but the twisted pines that bent under the weight of the ice like weary old men. The snow was already reaching his boots, and the sensation in his toes was beginning to fade. The storm showed no mercy. Every minute he spent on that mountain was an invitation to silent death. Cole knew all too well what extreme cold meant. He had seen men freeze to death without uttering a single cry. First the fingers lose feeling, then the feet, then the mind goes blank, and by the time you try to react, it's too late. He didn't intend to die like that, not after everything he had survived. He gritted his teeth. "If I don't find shelter in half an hour," he told himself, "this mountain will have my dead body." And then, like a miracle hidden in the blizzard, he saw it. Through the swirling snowflakes, far off on the hillside, a faint column of smoke rose. So thin it was almost indistinguishable from the storm. But there it was, a lit fireplace. His heart leaped. "Good heavens," he whispered. He spurred Dosti on with determination. The horse whinnied but obeyed. They rode on, through the frozen trees, until, slowly, the silhouette of an old wooden cabin emerged from the darkness. It was small, probably built many winters ago by some solitary trapper. The roof was heavy with snow, the windows fogged with the heat inside. A warm, flickering light escaped through the cracks. Cole dismounted with a grunt. His boots crunched as they sank into the deep snow. She hugged her body to keep warm as she climbed the creaking wooden steps under its weight. The wind seemed to push him back into the night, but he pressed on, determined. He rapped on the door with his knuckles. Nothing. He rapped again, harder. Silence. The storm raged behind him as if it wanted to devour him. He took a breath, rested his hand on the grip of his revolver, and pushed the door open. The creak was long and slow, like the whine of a wounded animal, and then he saw her. The cabin door opened with a slow squeak, slicing through the silence like a knife across bone. The heat from inside shot out, hitting his face as if someone had lit a fire in the middle of a white inferno. Paul squinted to adjust to the dimness illuminated by a single fire in the hearth, and then he saw her. In the corner by the hearth, an Apache woman stood with the dangerous elegance of a cornered cat. Her thick black hair fell over shoulders covered by a fur blanket. Her high cheekbones and obsidian gaze gleamed with the reflection of fire. He didn't move an inch, but his entire presence said, "This is my territory." In his hands, he held an old Spencer rifle, perfectly loaded and pointed directly at the intruder's chest. Cole instinctively raised his hands without drawing his revolver. "I'm not looking for trouble, ma'am," he said in English, his voice hoarse, aware that she probably understood him. The woman didn't respond at first, only observed him silently, analyzing every part of his body, like an eagle analyzing a rabbit before swooping down. The storm raged behind him, pushing against the half-open door, as if to remind him that out there, death awaited him with open arms. "Close the door," she finally said in rough but clear English. Cole obeyed slowly, without taking his eyes off the barrel. The sound of the door closing was like the click of a trap being triggered. Inside, there were only them, the fire, and the tense silence. "Look, I don't want to stay here any longer than necessary," Cole said. "I just need a roof over my head for tonight. The storm nearly killed me out there." She tilted her head slightly, as if assessing whether he was lying. Then coldly she replied, "White men always just need something." Cole pressed his lips together. He knew this woman wasn't just any peasant. Her bearing was strong, proud, and in her eyes was an ancient pain mixed with simmering rage. He could sense a widow before she uttered a single word about her past. The fire crackled, sending tiny sparks dancing in the air. The temperature inside was a luxury compared to the murderous storm outside. Cole felt his fingers beginning to regain feeling, but at the same time he understood he was walking on shaky ground. "What if I don't let you stay?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. Cole swallowed. Then he looked toward the door, where the wind was whistling like a hungry creature. "I'll freeze out there." She took a step forward. The rifle remained steady, but her voice lowered, becoming sharper, more intimate. "There's no room for cowards here," she said in Apache, then repeated it in English. "There are only two choices tonight." The wind rattled the wall, making the windows rattle. She moved a little closer. Cole could see the wet glint on her lips, the fire reflected in her dark eyes. There was no mockery on her face, only unwavering resolve. And then, enunciating each word slowly, she dropped the line that would seal both their fates. "Share my bed tonight, or freeze to death?" Cole stood motionless. It wasn't a proposition, it was a verdict. Outside, the storm raged with fury. Inside, the fire crackled, as if it, too, awaited its answer. And at the center of it all, a cowboy and an Apache widow gazed at each other, knowing that nothing would ever be the same after this night. The silence inside the cabin was so thick that you could hear the logs creaking. In the chimney crackled like distant gunshots. Cole stood motionless, his back slightly erect, his hands still near his belt, though he knew perfectly well that drawing his revolver would be nothing more than a death sentence. Before him, the Apache woman didn't blink. Her eyes were two black embers that betrayed not a single emotion. The wind battered the wooden walls like a war drum, and each gust reminded the cowboy of what awaited him on the other side of that door, a slow, white, and silent death. The decision wasn't difficult, but accepting it meant venturing into uncharted territory. Cole took a deep breath, fixing his gaze on her. "All right," he said in a grave voice. "I don't want any trouble. I just need warmth and a roof over my head, that's all." Nagel didn't respond immediately. She still held the rifle raised, as if waiting for the slightest false move to pull the trigger. After a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, she lowered the weapon gently, though without move it out of her reach. Her steps were firm, silent, like those of a huntress accustomed to dominating the night. "Close the window," she ordered. "I don't want the storm to steal the warmth." Cole obeyed. Each plank of the cabin creaked with her movements. As she placed a piece of heavy cloth over the crack in the window, she was able to observe the interior of the shelter in more detail. It wasn't a makeshift cabin. There were neatly arranged utensils, hides hanging to dry, a handmade rug in front of the fire, and a folded blanket on a simple wooden bed. Everything spoke of a solitary yet structured life. Nagel walked to the fire, threw in another dry log, and the glow illuminated her face. She was beautiful, but not with a fragile beauty. There was something wild and defiant in every line of her features, in the way she stood upright, in the way her hands never strayed too far from her weapons. Cole took off his hat, shook it vigorously, and left it near the door. She slowly unbuttoned the coat that weighed as if it carried the entire storm on its back. The warmth from the fireplace began to gnaw at the frost on her clothes, and a light steam rose around her body. "You can stay," she said finally, "but I'm not the only one in charge here. Tonight the storm rules, and if you're going to live, you'll obey my rules." "I didn't come to argue," he replied calmly. Nagel took a few steps closer, close enough for him to feel the warmth of her breath. "Don't forget," she whispered, "you're not welcome here. Just tolerated." Cole nodded. He had no intention of challenging a woman who clearly knew how to survive in conditions where many men would have succumbed. He sat on the floor near the fire, holding out his hands to regain the warmth he'd lost during the long hours of riding. The crackling of the flames filled the cabin with a hypnotic, almost primal rhythm. For several minutes neither of them spoke. Outside, the storm raged like a living creature, shaking the roof with the fury of a giant. Inside, time stretched between the wary glances of two strangers who by fate were condemned to share the same night under the same roof. Nahaley broke the silence. "You're one of those who killed my people." Cole looked up. "You know nothing about me. I know enough." Her tone wasn't one of blind hatred, but of bitter experience. "I've seen men like you come with promises, leaving blood." Cole lowered his gaze to the fire. He couldn't deny that in his frontier years, he had participated in things he preferred not to remember. "I didn't come here to fight you," he said. "I came because out there's no mercy." She didn't answer. She walked to the bed and began to spread a thick blanket over it without taking her eyes off it. Then she pointed to the floor beside the fire. "That's where you'll sleep. Don't try to get close to me if you don't want your last night to be short." Cole smiled with a weary irony. "Don't worry, the floor is better than a snow-covered grave." Nahaley turned off a lamp at the side of the bed, leaving only the fireplace to illuminate the room. Shadows lengthened across the walls, projecting their figures as if they were two strangers trapped in an old painting. The storm raged outside, relentless, but inside there was warmth, tension, and the feeling that the night was only just beginning. The fire burned slowly in the fireplace, each log bursting into tiny sparks that rose like fireflies caught in a dream. The storm showed no signs of letting up. The wind's blows against the walls sounded like the distant drums of a war that would never end. Cole settled on the floor, spreading out the rough blanket Nahaley had tossed him without a word. He felt the warmth of the flames on his face, but the rest of his body still held a deep chill, as if winter had seeped beneath his skin. Nagel stood by the window, watching the darkness outside with the same vigilance a wolf displays over its territory. At times, his silhouette appeared against the window. The flickering firelight was all Cole couldn't help but stare. It wasn't the first time he'd seen an Apache woman, but none had ever possessed this presence. It was a mixture of restrained strength and ancient sadness, as if she silently carried the memory of generations. She turned her head, catching him staring. Her deep black eyes pierced him without hesitation. "What are you looking at?" she asked softly, not hostile, but sharp. "Just trying to figure out what kind of hell I've ended up in," Cole replied dryly. "It's not hell, it's the mountain, and the mountain doesn't bow to anyone," she said. "Not to cowboys, not to soldiers, not to men with empty words." Cole gave a short, joyless laugh. "Then we have something in common. I don't bow easily either." Nahaley approached slowly. Her footsteps were silent on the wooden floor. When she was close enough, Cole could see the details of her face clearly, the fine lines around her eyes. Her skin was tanned by the sun, her jaw firm. She wasn't young like a village girl, nor old like an old woman. She was a woman, in her prime, forged by the harshness of the frontier. "Men like you always say the same thing," she whispered, "until the mountain silences them." She walked over to a low table and began preparing an infusion with dried leaves. Every movement was precise, economical, learned over many nights like this one. She poured hot water into a clay bowl, and the steam filled the cabin with an earthy, almost wild aroma. "Drink," she said, holding out the bowl. Without getting too close, Cole took it cautiously. The liquid had a bitter taste, unfamiliar to him, but the warmth spread quickly through his chest, breaking the ice that had been inside him for hours. "What is it?" he asked. "Herbs warm the blood." Then she added in a neutral tone, "I don't poison frozen men. I don't need to." Cole watched her over the edge of the bowl. "You don't seem like someone who does nothing without reason. I'm not." For a few minutes, the only sound was the storm outside and the crackling fire. Cole felt the weariness begin to weigh on his shoulders. He had ridden all day, and the tension of the previous scene still throbbed in his muscles. Yet he couldn't completely relax. Nagel's presence was like a taut rope in the middle of the room, invisible but impossible to ignore. "You haven't told me your name," she said suddenly. "Call Matthews." "Matthews," he repeated slowly, as if savoring the word. "Soldier's name? Cowboys," he corrected. "Cowboys and soldiers smell the same when they kill," she said without looking away. Cole gritted his teeth. "I didn't come here to be judged, and I didn't ask you to come into my house," she replied. Her words hung in the air like two crossed knives. Despite everything, there were no shouts or insults. It was a silent confrontation. The A-clash between two worlds that shared the same roof out of necessity, not choice. Nagel approached the bed and wrapped herself in her fur blanket. Before lying down, she looked at Cole with a coldness that didn't mask her distrust. "The storm will decide if you're still alive at dawn," she said. "But if you try to cross this line," she gestured to the imaginary ground between them, "I'll kill you before you take a step." Cole raised a hand in a gesture of calm. "I'm not moving from here. I've slept in worse stables." She lay on her side, her back to the fire, watching it over her shoulder. The room fell into a thick silence, broken only by the howling wind outside. Cole leaned against the wall, his hat pulled over his face, pretending to sleep, though in reality he heard every creak, every breath. The warmth of the fire and the brew began to take effect. The storm continued to roar like a wild animal, but inside the cabin, two lonely souls shared a space neither had planned. There was no trust, only a forced truce sealed by winter and necessity. Sometime during the night, Cole opened his eyes and watched her silently. Nahali slept with a short knife in her hand, as if even in sleep she refused to let her guard down. He sighed. He knew that night wouldn't be easy, nor would it be the last time their paths crossed. The storm raged all night. Outside, the wind continued to blow with the same fury, battering the roof and walls, as if it wanted to tear the cabin from its foundations. Inside, the fire held, casting orange flashes that reflected off the wooden walls, creating elongated shadows that seemed to move on their own. Cole had been lying on the floor for hours, unable to fall into a deep sleep. It wasn't the first time he'd slept in hostile territory, but this situation was different. This wasn't a makeshift camp in the middle of the desert, nor a ruined barn. It was the refuge of a woman who clearly didn't trust him. And to his surprise, that distrust didn't bother him. He respected it. He turned his head slightly. Nayla was still awake. She lay on her side, her eyes fixed on the fire, as if the flames were showing her something he couldn't see. Her hand rested on the knife, but her breathing was slow and deep. She didn't seem afraid, just possessed a natural vigilance rooted in her being. "You don't sleep," he said, breaking the silence for the first time in hours. "The mountains don't sleep," she replied without turning. "Neither do I." Cole sat up a little, propping his elbow on the rough blanket. "What do you see there?" he asked, pointing at the fire. It took Nayla a few seconds to answer. Memories, voices of those who were gone. Her words floated in the air like smoke. There was no drama in her tone, just a quiet, almost ritualistic affirmation. "My husband died here," she added, "in front of this very fire." Cole was silent. He didn't know whether to respond or just listen. Nayla continued as if she needed to get the words off her chest before they froze along with the storm. Men in blue uniforms came. They said it was for security. They said they would bring peace. A short, dry laugh escaped her throat. The peace came with bullets and fire. They burned the huts, killed the men. My husband fought to the end. They killed him in front of me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just watched. Cole felt a knot in his stomach. He had seen similar scenes in his life. Sometimes he had been on the other side. The border wasn't a place for heroes, only survivors. "I'm sorry," he said softly. Nayla looked at him directly for the first time that night, as if her eyes could pierce right through him. "Don't give me your apologies. They don't bring anyone back." The silence returned, heavy and dense. Cole looked at the flames and for the first time in a long time felt that the shadows were speaking for him too. "I'm not a soldier," he said after a while. "I was, for a time. The war. It ended, but for some of us it never truly ended. I marched west to escape it all. I thought I could leave what I'd done behind. But the dust and blood follow you like a hungry dog." Nayla listened without interrupting. Her face showed neither pity nor contempt, only attention. "How many did you kill?" she asked coldly. "Too many," he replied without hesitation. The flames crackled loudly, as if answering his confession. Cole lowered his gaze. "I never felt at home after that. No place wanted me, and I didn't want any place." Nayl sat up slowly, pulling the blanket up to her shoulders. "Then we're the same," she said. "Two people without land, without a place." Her words weren't kind, but neither were they hostile. It was a shared, almost intimate realization. For the first time, Cole felt that this woman, so distant and dangerous, wasn't just a stranger. She was someone who understood the weight of the ghost that haunted him. The wind blew hard, the window rattled. Nagel approached the fire to add more wood, her silhouette now fully illuminated. Cole watched her silently. and something inside him, something buried for years, began to stir. It wasn't desire yet, nor trust. It was recognition. She returned to her position without another word. The conversation was over, but not abruptly. They had simply said what they needed to say for that night. Two broken pasts, exposed before the flames, sharing the same warmth without physically approaching. Cole finally closed his eyes, not with the tranquility of a man safe, but with the resignation of someone who understands that dawn will bring something different, something he cannot yet name. The storm had lessened slightly, but it hadn't given up. The wind no longer roared like an unleashed wolf, but whistled through the trees like a thief trying to move unseen. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned, though lower, as if it too had decided to rest. Shortly after hours of battling the cold, Nagel wasn't asleep. Cole knew it without even looking at her. There was something about the stillness of her body that wasn't rest, but alertness. They shared a watchful silence, the kind of silence born of living too long in territories where a creak in the dark can mean death, and then a sharp sound, distinct from the storm, broke the stillness. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't a tree. It was a footstep. Nagel opened her eyes instantly. Cole also sat up silently, pushing back the blanket with measured movements. Outside, in the light blizzard, something was moving. "Did you hear it?" Cole whispered. Nagel nodded without a word. She got up slowly, barefoot like a shadow, took the Spencer rifle, and went to the window. She carefully removed a piece of cloth blocking the opening and peered through. The darkness was almost absolute, but Nagel's eyes were used to these nights. Among the snow-covered tree trunks, he discerned blurry shapes, calculated movements. They weren't animals, they were men. 3, she murmured softly. Maybe 4. Cole approached from behind her and peered through the crack. He could barely make out anything but shadows, but there was one unmistakable detail. The metallic click of a stirrup, the snort of a horse. These men weren't lost. They were approaching with a purpose. "They don't seem like friends," Cole said. "No one comes near in the middle of a storm unless they're looking for something," Nagel replied. She moved to the low table, extinguished the oil lamp, and then with an iron rod dimmed the fire in the fireplace, partially covering it. The interior light diminished, enveloping the cabin in a dense gloom. Cole drew his revolver, checked the cylinder, and stood by the door. His heart beat slowly but steadily. It wasn't fear, it was that acute state in which every sense sharpens like a new blade. The footsteps outside stopped. The wind blew, swirling the snow. And then there was a knock at the soft knock. Then another from the other side. Someone was surrounding the cabin. Nayla took up position behind the window, rifle ready. Cole stood by the door, ready. Neither spoke. The silence became an invisible battlefield. A harsh voice broke the night. "We know someone's in there. Come out, and maybe you'll come out alive." Cole raised an eyebrow. How kind. Yele didn't smile. Her gaze was pure ice. "Trappers," she said. "Fur thieves. Sometimes they're after women, sometimes food, sometimes blood." A second, louder knock rattled the door. The hinges groaned. Cool aimed her revolver. The voice came again, this time closer. "Open it, or we'll open it." Nahali took a deep breath, resting her rifle on the windowsill. "If you go in, you die," Cole whispered. He looked at her for the first time since he'd known her. He didn't see her as a threat, but as an ally. The men tried to force the door. The wood creaked, resisting. One of them peered out of the window. He was sideways and barely had time to scream. Nayla fired a single, precise shot. The Spencer's blast echoed through the cabin, and the figure fell heavily onto the snow. "One down," he said emotionlessly. The others reacted with shouts. 2 headed for the front door. It swung open. As the door slammed shut, the first man burst in with a short-barreled shotgun. Cole fired twice. Without moving an inch, the stranger fell backward, disappearing into the darkness. The third tried to skirt around the cabin, but Nagel was already there, moving with the agility of someone who knew every corner. Another shot, another body in the snow. The silence returned as quickly as it had gone, broken only by the whistling of the wind. Cole stood for a few seconds with his revolver raised, listening. Then he slowly lowered the weapon. "We weren't alone tonight," he murmured. Nayla peered through the window intently. "One's gone. He rode south. He won't be back tonight, but he'll be back with others." Cole took a deep breath. "So we don't have much time, Nayla." He calmly reloaded his rifle. His movements were mechanical, cold. He wasn't celebrating victory. He was only preparing for what was to come. This mountain always tests those who enter it. Some don't survive, others return hungrier. The fire blazed again as he placed a new log. The flames illuminated both their faces, two different people united by the need to endure. They were no longer just a cowboy and an Apache widow sharing shelter. They had fought together, and without saying a word, something had changed between them. The storm had left as suddenly as it had arrived, without warning and without apology. At dawn, an icy silence covered the Chiricahua Mountains. The sky was a metallic blue, and the sun rose slowly, casting pale rays that made the snow sparkle like a sheet of glass. The cabin, half buried under the night's blizzard, seemed like a solitary refuge in the middle of a frozen world. Cole cautiously opened the door. The cold air hit his face He took a step outside, sinking ankle-deep into the fresh snow. The scene before him was stark and cruel. 3 bodies lay scattered near the entrance, covered in frost, motionless like broken dolls. The 4th attacker had fled during the night. His footprints were visible, etched in the snow like a promise of return. Nayla appeared behind him, the rifle slung over his shoulder and the fur blanket wrapped around him. His hair was slightly disheveled, but his gaze remained steady, watchful. He said nothing at the sight of the bodies. There was no surprise, no satisfaction, only the calm of someone who had lived through too many mornings like this. "The one who escaped will return," he said finally. "Yes," Cole replied, "and he won't come alone." They walked together toward the bodies. Cole bent down to search their belongings. They weren't soldiers or settlers. They were poachers, men accustomed to living outside the law. They carried kitchen knives, rusty pistols, and bags of animal furs, freshly skinned. One of them had a torn badge hanging from his belt, maybe stolen from some marshal who died long ago. He didn't have anything good in mind, Cole said. Nigel bent over one of the corpses and checked the jacket. She found a crumpled piece of paper, stained with mud. She opened it carefully. It was a reward notice. The reward didn't include a picture, but it did have a description. Apache woman, widow from Guerrero, Chiricahua, dangerous, $200 for delivery, dead or alive. Cole watched her silently. Nagel didn't react, but she pressed her lips together tightly before folding the paper and throwing it into the fire outside that they were lighting to incinerate the bodies. "You're not the only one who survived tough times," Cole said. "I don't need your pity," she answered without looking at him. "I'm not offering you pity. I'm telling you I understand." Nigel looked up at him and studied him for a long moment. There was no sweetness in her eyes, but neither was there the ice she'd shown earlier in the night. It was an appraising look, as if he were measuring something invisible in him. "We'll see if it's true," he said finally. Cole helped pile the bodies and cover them with dry branches. They lit the fire. Smoke rose in thin columns into the clear sky, mingling with the sharp mountain air. The morning silence had a different weight. Now, it wasn't the calm of nature, but the pause between 2 storms. Back at the cabin, Cole repaired the door damaged during the night's attack. He nailed planks, adjusted the hinges, and reinforced the entrance with tools he found hanging on the wall. Nayla watched without intervening, like someone assessing a stranger while deciding whether to entrust them with the back of their horse. "You're not doing badly," he said finally without a trace of sarcasm. "I've fixed plenty of doors," Cole replied. "How many held up afterward?" "Enough to keep me alive," Nayla nodded. It was the first time a small glimmer of respect had crossed his face. He didn't smile, but the tension between them seemed to have eased slightly. They sat before the indoor fire, warming their hands. The sun filtered through the window, painting golden lines on the wooden floor. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. 2 people scarred by the past, bound by the need to survive, sharing a silence that was no longer hostile, but restrained. Cole broke the silence. "If they come back, they won't be able to do so without leaving a trace. I'll follow them before they find us." Naj turned her head to him. "We asked. Last night I wouldn't have survived without you, and you wouldn't have survived without me. You know that." She didn't answer, but her gaze was enough. They didn't need words to recognize that the invisible line between allies and enemies had shifted. Dawn in the mountains didn't bring peace, it brought clarity. And in that clarity, Cole and Naj understood that their destinies were already intertwined, even though neither of them had sought it. The sun had barely risen a couple of feet above the horizon when He stepped out of the cabin, his gaze fixed on the snow. The footprints of the escaped man were still clearly visible, heading south. No storm had yet erased them. It was like an open path, inviting him to follow it. Cole bent down, ran his fingers along the edges of the prints, and studied their shape. They were the imprints of worn, heavy boots. The snow around them was unevenly compacted. The man had run without looking back. "He's not far," he murmured. Nagel appeared behind him, wrapped in her fur blanket, her rifle slung over her shoulder. She looked at the footprints silently, then up at the clear sky. "If we follow him, we'll get farther from the cabin," she said. "If we don't, he'll bring others here," Cole replied. She didn't argue. She knew he was right. The bounty on his head was enough to attract any group of hungry men. If that fugitive reached the nearest town, they wouldn't be long in returning with reinforcements. Cole stood and adjusted Dusty's saddle. The horse snorted nervously. Feeling the crisp morning air, she said, "I'm going to follow him. I don't expect you to come." She checked her revolver. Nagel watched him closely. For a moment, the distrust of their first encounter seemed to return like an ancient shadow, but there was something different in her gaze now. Respect. If you die out there, they'll bring your body back. Hopefully, it'll give me a few hours head start, she said coldly, though not mockingly. Cole barely smiled. Then I'd better not die. She threw the blanket over the wooden railing, adjusted her boot straps, and mounted her own horse, a dark, agile animal that seemed as wild as its owner. "If you go, I go," she said simply. Cole didn't reply, but a spark of approval crossed his eyes. They spurred their horses and began following the track south, descending the trails, hidden among the snow-covered pines. The air was sharp. Each breath became a white cloud that instantly dissolved. The forest seemed motionless, silent as if watching them. The heavy branches of the fir trees formed natural arches over the path, and the crunch of snow under their hooves echoed clearly in the morning stillness. Nagel moved with ease. Her eyes scanned every stone, every shadow. Cole, used to plains and deserts, was surprised by how easily she read the terrain. "How long have you lived here?" he asked softly. "All my life," she replied without looking at him. "These mountains speak, you just have to know how to listen." Cole nodded silently. He wasn't the type of man who believed in superstitions, but there was something in the way she moved that reminded him that not all knowledge is learned from books or gunpowder. After an hour's ride, they reached a clearing. The track stopped briefly beside a frozen stream. The fugitive had paused there, perhaps to drink, perhaps to get his bearings. The footprints indicated that he then took the path that it descended into a narrow valley. "He's heading for the southern pass," Nagel said. "If he keeps going that way, he'll be in town by noon." Cole spat to the side. "Then we can't let him get there." They descended into the valley, quickening their pace. The snow was thinner in this area, and the uneven terrain forced the horses to move with precision. The sound of their hooves bounced off the rocks, creating echoes that seemed to follow them. The sun was already high when they spotted something in the distance, a solitary figure advancing on foot, so shaky yet determined. It was the fugitive. He hadn't heard them approaching yet. Cole raised his hand to stop Nagel. They ducked behind some bushes. "We can catch him in minutes," Cole whispered. Nagel shook her head. "If we do it now, he might have weapons. He might shoot before he goes down. What do you propose?" She dismounted swiftly, moving through the trees with the agility of a hunter. "I'll go around him to the east. You go straight ahead." "Don't shoot until I have it in his sights." Cole watched her disappear into the trees. There was something fascinating about the way she moved, silent, certain, as if she were part of the forest itself. He spurred Dosty gently and rode along the open path. The fugitive turned his head at the last moment. His eyes widened as he saw the cowboy approaching on horseback. He drew a gun from his belt but didn't have time to aim. A sharp shot rang out from the east hillside. Nagel. The bullet struck the ground inches from his feet, making him reflexively drop the weapon. Cole leaped off and knocked him down with a single blow. He subdued him easily. The man was exhausted, frozen, and scared. "You're not going to make it to any town," Cole said firmly as he tied his hands with the rope he carried on the saddle. Naheli appeared from among the trees, calm, unhurried. His face showed no emotion. "What do we do with him?" Cole looked at the prisoner, who was breathing heavily, shivering from the cold. "We'll take him from return. If there's a group waiting for their return, they'll now know they won't be coming. And if they do come, we'll see them coming." Naheli watched him silently. For the first time, there was no reproach in her eyes, only agreement. They remounted and began the return journey with the prisoner tied to Cole's saddle. The sun was slowly descending over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and red. The wind had completely died down. They rode side by side. They didn't speak, but they were no longer strangers. The hunt had sealed something between them. a wordless understanding. Evening fell slowly over the mountains, staining the sky a deep red that seemed to bleed onto the snow-capped peaks. The air grew colder, drier, and the golden sunlight disappeared behind the tall pines, giving way to a silence that seemed to come from another time. Cole and Nahele decided to camp in a small clearing, sheltered by rock formations and dense trees. It was an ideal place to spend the night without being seen from afar. The prisoner, tied to a tree trunk, he was holding on tight, breathing in short gasps. He wasn't trying to escape. The cold and exhaustion had defeated him hours ago. Cole gathered dry branches and lit a fire with habitual, automatic movements. The flames rose slowly, casting a warm glow that contrasted with the growing darkness. Nyla watched the perimeter, pacing silently through the shadows like a wild animal that never fully lets its guard down. When he returned, he sat down in front of the fire on the other side of Cole. Between them, there was nothing but the warmth of the flames and a muted tension that had been building since the night of the storm. It wasn't hostility, but neither was it complete trust. It was something more subtle, more dangerous. For a long time they didn't speak, only listened to the crackling of the wood, the light wind descending through the valley, and the quiet snorting of the horses tied up a few meters away. The darkness was thick, but the fire illuminated their faces with flashes of gold and orange, revealing details that the day had overlooked. Nail broke the silence. "You don't ask questions," she said without looking directly at him. "I only ask the necessary ones," Cole replied. "Most men talk too much. They want to know. They want to dominate. You observe." Cole shrugged. "Talking hasn't saved my life. Listening has." Nahele looked at him from across the fire. Her eyes reflected the flames like two dark mirrors. "Maybe you're not like the other cowboys," she said. "Or maybe I'm worse," he answered. She didn't smile, but a shadow of curiosity crossed her face. She settled herself on the ground, crossing her legs over a blanket and wrapping herself in her fur coat. "Tell me something," she said finally. "What were you looking for when the storm brought you to my door?" Cole hesitated before answering. He stared into the fire, as if the answer lay within it. "Nothing," he said finally. "Or maybe everything. I stopped looking for a purpose a long time ago. I walk, I survive, I drink when there's whiskey, I work when there's money. The West doesn't give life meaning, only it gives you time until it stops giving it to you." Nayla nodded slowly. "That's not living, that's waiting for death." "Maybe," he said without taking his eyes off the flames. "But it's what I know how to do." The woman moved a little closer to the fire. The temperature had dropped sharply and the night breeze cut her skin. "I don't wait for death," she said softly. "She came for me once, and I let her go. She won't take me by surprise again." Cole looked up. Their eyes met through the fire, and for an instant everything else disappeared. The snow, the horses, the sleeping prisoner, the black sky above them. There were only the two of them, two souls hardened by different paths, facing each other in silence. He spoke then more slowly. "Your husband fought to the end." Nayla watched him attentively, without aggression. "Yes, and I fought too. I still fight every day." "I know," Cole said. "It shows in every word you say." She lowered her gaze for a moment. It wasn't weakness, it was a respite. The toughness in her features softened slightly in the firelight. "When they killed my husband, I thought my heart had died with him, but it didn't. It kept beating slowly, like a distant drum." She placed a hand on her chest. "Sometimes I wish it would stop, but it does." Cole said nothing. He simply listened. He had seen many men break after the war, but rarely had he seen someone stand with such dignity. "And you," she said suddenly, "what did you lose?" Cole exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had kept bottled up for years. "Everything," he said. "My people, my country, my faith, myself." The words weren't dramatic, they were naked, like the truth when there's nothing left to disguise. The fire crackled louder, illuminating their faces in a sudden flash. Nagel watched him with a new intensity. It wasn't the gaze of a wary guardian, it was the gaze of someone seeing another person for the first time without the layers of pride, anger, or mistrust that had separated them. A long, but not awkward silence followed, dense as the stillness before a gunshot. Nayla got up and walked over to the fire, standing beside it. She said nothing, just sat close enough to feel the warmth of his shoulder through the blankets. Cole didn't move, nor did he speak. Their breaths mingled with the rhythm of the flames. Above them, the sky had opened. Thousands of stars shone with a clarity that exists only on cold desert nights. And in the midst of that immensity, two lives that had run in opposite directions met for the first time without words, without weapons, without masks. The night in the mountains was clear and silent, too silent. The stars hung across the sky like shining nails, and the icy air made every sound travel far. The campfire had dwindled to glowing embers that dimly illuminated the small camp. Cole slept leaning against a log, his hat covering his face. Nagel, as always, wasn't sleeping soundly. His senses were anchored to the forest, to the wind, to any imperceptible change. And then she felt it. It wasn't the howl of the wind or the rustle of a nocturnal animal. It was the muffled, rhythmic tapping of hooves on hardened snow, still far away, but drawing nearer. Nahele sat up at once. Her gaze shifted to the valley they had entered hours before. Something was moving like a dark current among the shadows of the trees. She stood and went to Cole. "Wake up," she whispered firmly. He opened his eyes instantly, like a soldier in enemy territory. "How many?" "I don't know yet," she said, "but they're coming." Cole stood, adjusted his belt with the revolver, and looked toward the valley. The crescent moon provided enough light to make out mounted figures. A column of riders was advancing silently, but their number was clear, at least 6 armed men. "They came fast," Cole murmured. The fugitive wasted no time. Nahele nodded, took her rifle, and checked the bullets with precise movements. No.